right, hello everyone. We have a few more in-person people signed up as well. I figure they're probably on their way there from class or something like that. So we will be leaving the door open. But my name is Carissa. I am a staff member here at the university. Also, hello to everyone online. I'm also the chairperson of a new group that we have here on campus called Bloom. It's blossoming, learning, overcoming opportunities and mastery. So we're focusing on youth incarceration outreach as well as outreach to our campus community, offering events and things that are good for our students and opportunities for you all as well. And this is actually our first kickoff event. And as part of that, I just wanted to say a quick thank you to our Student Government Association, the College of Letter Arts and Sciences, the Kramer Family Library, the Office of DEI, as well as the Center for Religious Diversity in Public Life for helping make all of this event possible. Without further ado, I will introduce our speaker tonight, Ryan Forbes. He came all the way from Longmont for us, is a part of the Longmont Recovery Cafe, and has his own podcast, which is very fun, and on waywordpress.com as well as the comic that we're going to talk about tonight. So I will send it to Ryan.
All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming out tonight. And yeah, thank you so much for having me. And to start everything off, I just want to say there's been a lot of prep and everything for these talks and everything. And it's been really great to get to know. I've got to work with students. I've got to work with faculty. Gotten to work with staff. So the first thing I just want to say is thank you to everyone at UCCS. You've all been amazing, and I am just thoroughly impressed by everyone here. I think this is just an amazing school, and all the students here, you're really lucky. So that's the first thing I want to say. The second thing, I'm going to cover a wide range of topics, go into parts of my personal experience. So you're welcome to raise your hand during this, and I'm going to, I want to leave some time for questions at the end too. So if you want to raise your hand in the middle of this, I'm happy to answer it. Carissa will be keeping an eye out for questions online, and so if you need more clarification, if it's getting confusing, please let me know, and we'll have time for in-depth questions at the end too. So, who am I? Well, as Kristen mentioned, I just got done making a restorative justice graphic novel, but how did that even happen? And that was a long process. For about a decade, I was actually a software developer. I got a degree in computer science from Montana State University. I was doing work for startups, and then I started working for the Department of Defense, and then I started working for Fortune 500 companies, and then I decided, this is my career, this is my life, this is my main goal, and that's what I'm gonna do. And I decided I didn't care about my family, didn't care about my friends, didn't care about my health, and that's when I caused a crash that ended up killing a young man. And that crash, I ended up getting a 10-year sentence in prison and a 10-year probation sentence. But along with that sentence, I got this community service aspect of it. And I got 400 hours of community service. The judge put on this 400 hours of community service, and he said, I want you to do some talking and at some schools. And I want you to talk to the kids. And because I honestly can't remember because it was a blur, but I was about to go to prison for 10 years. And so I couldn't quite remember, but he had a very long specific rant. But when I finally got out of prison, he came back and he said, we were looking over the conditions, and they were talking about going out and speaking at schools, which I got an interstate compact to come out here and live in Colorado with my friends and family up here. And you can't do that for community service. Really, as a felon, they're not going to let you just go into schools, let alone collect community service hours for that. So the question was then, what was I going to do? And how are they needed to meet the conditions, Texas conditions and Colorado's conditions, for me to meet the goals of those hours. So the question is, how was I going to do that, period? And so my probation officer asked me, what are you doing right now? Well, I was fresh out of prison, living with my mom in Niwot, Colorado. If you don't know where Niwot is, don't worry, most people don't. And it was not quite post-pandemic yet. So there was nothing going on. And the only thing I really had going on was this. And that is my buddy who had been locked up 30 years, his name is Malone. He had been working on comics, like pretty much he'd been practicing his art, honing his art skills the entire time he had been locked up. And he had a stack of copy paper that with a full-fledged comic on it. And I told Malone, I said, we had been wanting to work and do our own comic together. I do the writing, he do the art. And I said, let's do it. We're both out, let's do this. And he's like, well, I need to, like, this one's pretty much done. Why don't we publish this one? I need to publish this one first. And I said, well, what's the holdup then? How long is that going to take? He says, well, this dude up in Austin is doing the lettering for me, and I'm kind of waiting on that. I'm like, you've been waiting on that dude since you were in prison. Like, so you just need the lettering done, and then you can send it to a printer? I'm like, I'll do that. I'll figure it out. And I had to figure it out, and it was hard, but I had some time, and I figured out how to letter the book. I cleaned it up, put it into a PDF form, and I found a printer. And I'll kind of go through a little bit of that process later, but I found a printer, and that was kind of what I was in the process of doing when probation asked me, what are you doing right now? So when probation heard that, they're like, why don't you talk to our Restorative Justice Department? I was like, why? Well, I'm like, that's great. I love Restorative Justice. Restorative Justice, for those who don't know, is, it was something I learned about while I was in prison. It was, whereas criminal justice, the standard criminal justice system is very adversarial. It's the defense versus the prosecution. Who can get more time? The defense is trying to get less time. And it's one wins, one loses, the end. Restorative justice is about healing. It's about recognizing who was involved, giving them all a say, and trying to get everyone's voices heard, and also trying to heal all the parties involved. So I was like, that sounds great, but I mean, why do you want to send me to them? Well, I didn't know at the time, but Boulder County had this big art program, all these art initiatives going on in the Restorative Justice Department. They had basically, they were doing music, they were doing stories, they were doing plays, all these amazing things that they had just going on in the Restorative Justice Department. So when they heard about me, they asked me, what do you think about doing a restorative justice graphic novel? And when they asked me that, I just said, not a good idea. And because basically what they were telling me, they were saying, we want you to tell your story, and then at the end of the story, we want you to give the apology you never got to give to the victim's family in that courtroom, basically. And like and give them that and provide some sense of healing. And which was great. But I'm like, that's a big ask. One, And also I'm like, that also doesn't sound like a great graphic novel. I was like, that, I don't know if that sounds like a really great story. But then I started thinking about this. And when I was in prison, Malone and I we studied graphic novels. We studied comics. We studied all of these things. We would pass comics back to each other across the prison. And one thing that Malone really taught me is that it's not the characters, it's not the genre, it's not the setting, it's the writers and the artists that really really make or break the story. You may think you love Spider-Man, but you really like it when Brian Michael Bendis writes Spider-Man. Like that's generally the Spider-Man most people think of when they think of a really great Spider-Man story. And one really good example is this right here. This is an example of Brandon Graham. Now, Brandon Graham, most people have never heard of him, but what he does is he'll take a set, like this is a portion of a panel of his, and he'll cram all these little details into this setting. And there will be so many things going on in this setting. You could spend a half an hour just examining it, going through it line by line, and not catch every little thing that's going on in that setting, in that backdrops. There's jokes, there's little mini conversations, there's little mini stories going on throughout the panel, and there's references to other parts of the book that you won't catch. Like, it would take you hours of dissecting it, and you're going to see something new every time you look at it. And the other part was, like, he had really funny puns that he would reuse everywhere for names and references. And he also did something where he would actually make the word balloons into physical objects the characters could use at key points in the story, which is something I ended up using for my Restorative Justice graphic novel. And then similarly, we studied other writers and artists. And like I said, this is the Spider-Man most people recognize is Bendis' Spider-Man. And just like V for Vendetta has nothing without the writer behind it. And you'll notice later, I'll make a reference, look at how many panels are in there. I'll leave that a little note for later. And here we have like John Romita Jr.'s art, that's one of the things a lot of people think of, like classic Marvel stories, and a lot of times or in classic Marvel pictures, a lot of them come directly from that artist. So then also, this would be way better community service than 400 hours picking up trash on the side of the freeway. So the graphic novel gets a green light. So then I'm getting the green light, and I'm starting to work on this graphic novel. And I'm not concerned about, all I'm concerned about is just, how is this going to turn into 400 hours? How can I get this done? How can I make this into a compelling story? I also have kind of on the back of my mind some other things I want to fit into this story. I don't just want to talk about restorative justice. I also want to talk about prison abolition and some other aspects. So, because I can want to talk more about those parts of my experience as well. But I'm working with Deb Witzel mainly, and also Oliver Jacobson, they were part of the Boulder County Restorative Justice team, and they really focused on Ryan. This is going to get emotional really quick. And within the first few pages, I realized I had to stop, because one of the first things that happens is I have to describe the wreck. And when I got to that point, it just stopped. And with their help, they helped kind of coach me and guide me and be like, okay, this is what's going on. Let's talk about this. It's okay. What do you need to move forward? What do we need to get this page done? How are we going to get this working? So that was one place where there was a big hiccup. The other one was this, which is the sentencing hearing, which was, in reality, this was the most emotional part. The part that I think back on, the part that the biggest, beyond the crash, the biggest part of it that influences me to this day is this sentencing hearing. And I totally got stuck on that when I was writing the storyboard. But once again, they kept coaching me, they kept me working through it. And honestly, because of their help, because they helped coach me through it, and these 2 points in the story, I feel like are the most powerful. They're the parts that really got me through it. And then even as I was drawing the story, I had to rewrite like the ending and everything. And those parts came off better for having that restorative justice team there to help me guide and listen, and like they helped me basically stay on task really as I went through it, as I was getting stuck. So storyboarding, the first time I ever storyboarded was in prison. I learned from graphic novels they would have storyboards at the end that the original artists would use, or the original writers would use. And I read them and I was like, it was really interesting to see the difference between the original storyboard and the final product. And and they wrote them just like you would, like a screenplay, with notes directly to the artist, being like, hey, with the artist's name directly in it, do it this way. And if you want to do it this way, and do it in like your style, da da da. And I was like, that's kind of cool. And I really liked that idea, and I kept that in the back of my mind. And then finally, what happened was, I was reading, as I said, reading a bunch of graphic novels, reading a bunch of comics, and there's this character in the DC universe called Kyle Rayner, who is a Green Lantern that DC hates. They do not like him. They really, anytime he comes up, they really are trying to make someone else look better. And I don't like it because I feel like he is an amazing character that just has not been given a chance. And so I decided I'm going to write a story for Kyle Rayner that shows how cool this character is. Like, how can we use this character? And so I wrote this 6-part series, storyboarded just the way I'd seen it in the graphic novels, and with like instructions on the panels and the characters and all that kind of stuff, and then just kind of put it away. And then I met Malone, and Malone heard I had it, and he's like, oh, I want to check it out. I want to see what this thing is. And he read it, and he's like, this is great. I love it. You should draw it, and it should not be about Green Lantern. It should be about your own character. And which was a very good note, which I did not listen to at all. And I will get to why that's a really good note here in a bit. But he gave me a lot of good advice that I didn't listen to, and I said, Malone, you need to draw this, you need to draw this. And he drew it because he showed me that I was asking way too much from the artist. I had a 1 page that had like 6 panels, and I put every comic book character in every Batman villain in that panel, in every single one of the panels. It was crazy. And he's like, you're asking for a masterpiece in every single one of these panels, and it's too much to draw. Why don't you draw a comic? Why don't you do that? And it took a while for me to take those suggestions. And I finally listened to him. There was another character. I was reading a whole bunch of old 90s comic book characters, and I found this other character that was just this character named Thorn that's just like the craziest. It's like someone cosplayed as Poison Ivy, and just she decided she's going to fight crime because someone stole her VHS player. I'm like, why is this not bigger? Like, why is she not mainstream? And so I wrote a story about her, and I drew it all out, and then I realized Malone is right. I cannot put an entire SWAT team in one panel. That's asking too much. I need to arrange it differently, pace it differently, and even still to this day when I'm writing storyboards, it's hard. But one of the big takeaways is when I'm storyboarding, I go through and I draw it now. I don't write it as words. I draw it like I'd want to see it on the page and put stick figures and like kind of, so I can kind of walk through it on the page that way and see what's going on the page and get a feeling of if it's getting too packed, if there's too much going on. So, yeah, this is one of the things that I was kind of thinking would, like, one of the other things other than restorative justice that I wanted to shoehorn into the graphic novel. And this is a point that I kind of need to, like, I wanted to make known that I was kind of like honestly working against as I was doing the graphic novel. Because I was still, like I said, I was still fresh out of prison. So I was worried, I was like still feeling angry from the punishment, angry about the slavery, angry about people dying, angry about like people actually paying money for this thing that did not seem to be helping anyone. So I had all these feelings going into it. So the focus had to turn onto this, like onto the restorative justice process. And like I said, I worked mainly with Deb Witzel of 3 Stories Consulting. And that's a lot, that's her main work outside of her work with Boulder County Restorative Justice. And that big part was how much of this story is my story. How, like, making sure that this is not all just about me. We're seeing how this is affecting the victims, how it's affecting my family, how it's affecting other people, and the bigger overall story. Even though this is my perspective, it's clearly my perspective going into it. The other big thing is certain things like phrasing. And one of the big things as we were going through it was, and it was really hard, is like saying, I was saying, this is a story about an accident. I caused an accident that night and it killed someone. And they're telling me, like, no, you caused a crash. I understand took ownership, but that word accident is taking away that ownership you just put on it. You're just saying this is a random event, but you have to make clear you caused a crash, and that it was caused, like, that is part of the ownership. So even though I would never try to deny that I caused the crash, I was learning that I had to take even more ownership than what I was already doing through this process, which honestly, it was hard because I wasn't expecting or really even ready for that. But it was something I had to work through as I was going through and making this book. And I think that was also something they were fully expecting as I was going through and making this book. So why restorative justice? Why worry about it? Why does it need a graphic novel? Why make a big hullabaloo over it? And the big thing is that, like, as I said, in general, criminal justice is adversarial. Restorative justice is about healing, and it's about giving people a voice. And in general, one of my favorite analogies to this is that imagine a vegan's been wandering through the Sahara Desert and they come up to a burger stand and the guy gives them a burger and they eat it. And someone goes, see, he's not a vegan, he ate the burger, it's fine. And it's not because they're not a vegan or that they like burgers. It's because that's the only thing that's being offered. That's kind of how our justice system is right now. That's the only thing that a lot of time that's being offered. And restorative justice is about giving the victims the power to decide what's being offered and a choice in what's being offered and what the result is. Prison is currently an option, and it's not. I could make an argument right now about all the reasons why it's not a great one, but if you want to hear points about that, it just so happens tomorrow night we're going to have a big discussion about that, about crime. We're going to have campus police. We're going to have students. We're going to have faculty. We have a great moderator in there for it, and we're going to be talking about possible future of crime. So that will be a discussion for tomorrow night. And we'll be talking about restorative justice. We'll be talking about transformative justice, which is another thing I really believe in, which is basically taking transformative justice, which is also very interesting. That's taking, if there's a societal reason why someone commits a crime, someone can't afford their rent, so they end up stealing things to get by. How do we get them to afford their rent? Like those aspects of it. That's transformative justice. But even when you have transformative justice, I feel like there has to be a restorative justice component to heal the people who were hurt by theft or whatever the part is. But like I said, there will be more about that tomorrow night. And if you want to learn more about restorative justice, the comic is available for free online if you want to download it. And there is a crowdfunding campaign right now if you want to get a paperback copy. And you can even be in the book too. So all options coming up. So why art and restorative justice? As I mentioned before, like kind of going through this process, I kind of started to see there were aspects there were lots of blind spots in my acceptance and taking responsibility that I couldn't see unless I was doing this book. Also, a big part of restorative justice is about storytelling. It's about telling the story, understand, and really about getting meaning from it. It's also about hearing what other people said. A lot of times in restorative justice, traditionally it's done there's no art involved. It's just done straightforward. This person says this, people listen, and that's it. But sometimes that's not an option. Sometimes they need to do it in a different way. Sometimes a person is not ready to take on full responsibility. So a process like using art, using a play, using something so that you can understand the other person's perspective can be used so that they can do that. The other aspect that is really powerful about art is that a big part of restorative justice is trying to give meaning to this, to help everyone who's been hurt by the tragedy. I feel like one of the most harmful aspects of a crime or really anything, the worst, I feel like the most harmful moments are things that are meaningless. Like they happen for no reason. If it happens for no reason, it hurts so much more. But if a story is given a meaning and it doesn't justify what happened, but it gives it meaning that this bad thing, even though it happened, it will help, can help others or do something helpful going forward. And as I say, for me personally, it's like my mission since the accident has always been to try and help prevent people from going through what I went through and causing the pain that I caused in order to learn the lessons that I learned. I would rather people learn it without having to do the damage that I did. And that's my hope that can become from the crash that I caused. And that's what gives it meaning for me. And it's things like that that I hope that victims and people who have been hurt can gain from it. All right, publishing. So I have two, I have a comic and I have the graphic novel. Warp Ranger #1, the comic, was print only, and then A Better Path, the graphic novel, is online. So for print, the process for print was basically, I had to find a printer first. Who's going to print this book? And how can I print the book, make enough money on however many prints I make so that I can make another round of prints? And I looked online, and like the goal, I knew a 30-page comic is usually sold for $5. So that was the goal to sell Warp Ranger #1 at. But when I was looking online, to make any sort of profit on it, like I was gonna have to sell it for $10 for a 30-page comic book, or I was gonna have to print 1,000 copies of the book, which I couldn't afford to print that many copies. And I kept on looking. Every time I looked online, I would do these Google searches, and I could not find anything better. And there'd be ads all over the place. You can find printers all over, but there was nothing that was breaking that barrier. So then I went to the comic book shop, and I talked to the owner, and he recommended I talk to another local comic book artist. And he said, you know what, there's a place up in Michigan, and you should look at them. And it was called, oh wow, my name's blanking on it right now. I can put it in the notes, I'll send it to Carissa. But I found the place in Michigan, and I could do it. I could do 300 copies, $5 a piece, and then if I sold all of them at $5 a piece, I could do another round of 300. And because they were focused on comic books. So they did comic book, graphic novels, they did all the stuff you needed for conventions, and those were the keys to it. Like, so that, because they were printer focused on that, they ended up getting a lot of, they had a lot of supplies, and it was priced right for like newly started up comics. But I highly recommend that if you're looking for printers and things like that. That is a great way to do it. And then the other question is too, well, why go through all this work? Why don't you go to a publisher? Why don't you go to a mainstream? Why don't you try and sell your comic to one of the mainstream publishers? And the reason I didn't do that is because of this guy. If you recognize that character on the screen, that means you went into a comic book shop in the 90s, or you really like old comics. That is Cerebus. Cerebus was a self-published comic that went from the 70s up into the early 2000s. Cerebus also appeared in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and Spawn, and was a very popular character in the 90s. And the reason this self-published comic got so big is because of the guy who created him, Dave Sim. Dave Sim became the mega advocate for self-publishing. He became the guy that he would go to conventions, he would pack rooms full of people coming, whether they wanted an autograph, whether they wanted just to hear him speak, whether they already agreed with what he had to say, whether they wanted to come in there and argue, which many people did, with what he had to say, and then everyone would leave and they'd want to self-publish a book. And what he did is he actually, because he was so his talks were so powerful at these Comic-Cons, he actually printed a zine that was called Cerebus Guide to Self-Publishing. And the Cerebus Guide to Self-Publishing had everything you need to know about self-publishing, and it even had one of his Comic-Con talks in there. And this Malone somehow got, like, you can get this book online right now. And Malone somehow got his hands on it. But if you go online and look for it, it ranges from $60 to $100 on Amazon right now. You can get, Dave's now makes a republished version for $10, but Malone had the original one from that convention, which don't know how he did it. And that guide to self-publishing really explains to you the process. What you do is you make your original character. Okay, you make your original character, and you make him, and then you make issues 1 through 6. Then put that into a combined graphic novel. Make 7 through 12. Put that into a graphic novel, and then you live off, and then you get the royalties from all of those. And you keep going through that process. You go to conventions, you make art specifically for the conventions, and do all of that. That was Dave Sim. And so and then as I mentioned, Malone said, why don't you make your own character? Why don't you take Green Lantern and do that? Because Dave Sim explained that this was actually a very popular process in the 90s. There is a very famous group of comic book characters from the 90s called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. They are based on a story arc from Daredevil, where Daredevil is fighting a bunch of ninjas called the Hand. So the Ninja Turtles fight these ninjas called the Foot. And he just took parallels from each one and just made his own characters that fit into the Ninja Turtles universe. And it's basically a total ripoff of Daredevil. He just used his own original characters for it. And so he didn't have to pay them anything. And now I think he's okay. I think that guy made a little bit of money from the Ninja Turtles. But that was what Dave Sim was saying about self-publishing. And that's kind of why everyone kind of got into it. But this is, after reading that, that's kind of why I got into the Warp Ranger, and what really got me into self-publishing was that guy right there. Conventions, things to know about conventions. Really, the one thing too about, one other note about from what Dave Sim was saying, he also was right. He was a big celebrity at the time when there seemed to be no end to comics and zines and paper media. And then the internet happened, and then that kind of killed a lot of things. But your publishing things still happen, and conventions are still conventions. There are still, they still want, the one thing you'll notice that isn't right here is you don't see a whole bunch of posters, because that's what people want. People will buy a whole bunch of posters, and then you can say, oh, also there's this original comic book. And people will they'll buy the comic book with the posters. But they want an original art Stranger Things poster, or an original art Star Wars, and an original art Harry Potter, and they're all their favorite characters. And then they might be like, oh, you have an original comic book too? Sure, I'll get that with it, because that's what they're going for the conventions for. And then they'll get the comic along with it. But conventions seem to have stayed the same since Dave Sim was in there. And then right now, what I'm doing is crowdfunding. And one thing that I learned from the process is basically, are you a small business? Are you doing it as a business? Are you doing it as yourself? If you're gonna, Kickstarter is the number one thing. But if you want to do Kickstarter, get your business established, get your EIN right away before you even plan out the Kickstarter, so you have time, and then go into it. Right now I use Chuffed. Chuffed is a great one for if you have any activist programs or things like that. But other than that, there's other great ones. Patreon is great if you have multiple things coming out and several projects going on. But I'm gonna stop right here, and I definitely want to get questions if anybody's got questions, and kind of take anything from the audience. Yes?
What has been the biggest change between writing Warp Ranger and moving into a comic that's about yourself?
So what has been the biggest change since working on Warp Ranger and then doing a comic about myself? I think the biggest thing one of the biggest changes has been that Warp Ranger was not my comic. That was really Malone's work. It was his story, his art, and then I was solely focused. I did the lettering, but I was doing the publishing. But the other part was, so I was actually going through the full part of the process. But the other part about this is this whole process, having the restorative justice process in it, this was intentionally meant as like a healing emotional process. There was the only emotions that were coming out during Warp Ranger were Malone and I butting heads on how we do this or that. Whereas the graphic novel was, okay, how do I deal, like I'm now having to understand this crash that I got to see. I'm still doing it. So this crash differently, and what does that mean and how does that work? Yeah.
What's the biggest challenge about writing your own story? Just the emotions.
What was the biggest challenge about writing my own story? Yeah, the emotions were definitely a challenge. And I think, so one of the stories I wrote in prison actually was this book called, it was called Just in Time. And there was a character in it, and was basically me, but it was supposed to be, but Malone actually gave me the idea for it because he told me that this other famous writer had written a book, and he said, you don't ever put yourself in it because anything you write in the comic comes true. I'm like, awesome. So like, and he had said he did it because like he made this character a superhero that was based on him, and then he broke the character's nose, and then he ended up breaking his nose, and all this stuff, everything that happened to the comic to the character ended up happening to the writer. And I was like, no, I'm gonna have this character who's an inmate who ends up getting gets taken out of prison by this like female Thor character and gets swept all over the universe and like goes on all these zany adventures and all this kind of stuff. I'm like, this is going to be awesome. And like that was kind of silly, but even as I was writing that, I'm like, I got kind of fun drawing this weird version of me, but this one I did like the fact that I had to be kind of the accuracy of it and like trying to like seeing how to portray it. One of the really the hardest part was like getting to the victim's family and how I was going to do that. And it got to, you'll notice in the book, I draw them differently than the other, I draw specific victims differently because I don't want, you see me, like you see like this characterization of me. I don't want you to see a characterization of them. I want you to kind of see a symbolic version of them. And it's because that part kind of gets too hard, and I don't want it to ever turn. I'm okay with things turning silly on me and it turning on me. I couldn't have that happen with them. And I think that's probably where things got hard. And like Just in Time, that was fun to write because it was all silly. But this was not there was maybe some silly moments in the story because I'm like, there's stuff, everyone has silly moments in their story, but this was serious, and how do I characterize that and put these people who actually got hurt in it? Yes?
I've got two questions. How did the family of the victims react to the comic? And then secondly, have you always been able to tell stories, or is it something you grew into, a skill you developed more?
Yeah. So, all right, the first part of this question, how did the victim's family react to the story? And so one of the things that I learned in recovery, and that's also a part of restorative justice, is when do you do more harm than good? And we agreed that me reaching out to the victim's family and going at that, because I have not heard from them ever since, would do more harm than good. And so as far as I know, they've never read it, as far as I know. I don't know if it wasn't necessarily for them, or like, I don't know, it was more, honestly, the end all story was for everyone. It's for everyone to understand more of what, like, the possibility of a restorative justice, like that angle and used in that way. But so that's that part of the question. And the other part is what is my history with writing and storytelling and those type of things. So when I was a kid growing up, I actually loved drawing. Like, I would usually, when I was playing with my toys, I had like I would tell stories with them. And then when I was locked up and I basically knew I'm not doing software development. I recognized at that time that that was part of my addiction, was overworking and taking away the focus from family and loved ones and those type of things. So I recognized that those were work was a problem, did not want to do that again, and I needed to find something different. And storytelling was something I wanted to practice while I was in there. So I actually saw, like, I have now at my house all the stuff I wrote in prison, and I'm talking boxes, and I could fill this entire stage just with paper of stuff I've written. And that was a way I spent my time, was writing, whether it was essays or stories or things like that. And so that was a big part of it, and trying to practice, trying to get better, trying to hear people learn from it. I did actually win a statewide prison writing contest hosted by the Insider Prize, which was by American Short Fiction, while I was inside too. So I got some, and I also got published in The Sun magazine. So that's some of my storytelling experience before writing this. Yes?
One from online is, how long was the process for self-publishing or publishing in general?
How long was the process for self-publishing or publishing in general? So for Warp Ranger, at the end of the day, we had the actual, once we had comic books in hand, then we actually went and we took them to comic book stores and then conventions and things like that. It really, if you want, once you have the comic book and the actual, like a PDF file, you can within weeks have your book printed and ready to go. You can probably even get it sooner than that, depending on the printer and how much you're willing to pay. So we had it within, I think it was within a month, we had the books, and then it was a matter of getting, and then right after that, I went to the comic book shop and went on the shelf. One of the things you need to do, and I have it in the slide, is you should work on a contract, and you need to work on, like, am I going to do consignment? I was, for the next time I was going to do a book, I was going to make a deal so that it's better for them to buy the comic books outright than to do consignment deals, which consignment means you give them the comics, they sell whatever they sell, they give you the profit from, and then they give you the rest of the comics back, that's just annoying to keep track of. It's better even if you're a starting artist, to say, hey, buy 5 of my comics, you'll sell them. Like they'll sell eventually, and then just give them a better deal on it, doing it that way. But that process took longer. That aspect of it, over 6 months, we were doing conventions and doing the project, and we still have now, after 2 years of conventions and going to comic book shops, Warp Ranger 1 is nearly sold out now. At least the first edition of Warp Ranger 1. What else? Yeah. See if I heard it correctly. So you're saying after like 2 years of going to conventions and things like that, have I been running into other artists and getting like support from them and things like that because I've been doing the circuit? Which, yes, yeah, I have been running into more artists like doing the similar convention circuit, which is honestly, it's awesome. Like that's like one of the best parts of the convention circuit is meeting other artists. The first time we went to Fan Expo in Denver, we had Fan Expo. One thing, I'm not going to talk up Fan Expo. Fan Expo is a lot of fun, but when Fan Expo bought Denver's Comic Con, they went in a weird direction with it, and then they kind of made. Everyone says got really disorganized, and we noticed it right away because they put our comic book right in the kind of the science fiction fantasy book section. And so all these people coming to look for fantasy books, like books, not comics, they've got our comic book. But they also took this really awesome comic book writer and put him right next to us too. And so we were the only 2 comic book booths in this giant sci-fi section. And so we talked to each other the whole time, and he gave us a whole bunch of guidance. And he basically told us a lot of the things I was talking about in the convention part, which was you got to have a portfolio of posters. You got to do and he showed us too, he was the best. He could get you, when he was on, he would just go, he could look at you and be like, he would say, he's like, oh, what's that? What are you dressed as? Let me talk. And he'd get you rolled into a conversation, and then by the end, he would have sold you a graphic novel. That's how good he was. And he became an excellent convention salesman, but he had been doing this for years, and it was amazing. And I'm always amazed at the artist's art that's at the conventions. And really, buying a booth is the same as getting 2 convention tickets, and you get 2 convention tickets when you buy a booth. So why don't you try and make your money back? and do it that way. If you've got someone to go with and who can help you do this project, I highly recommend make something, go there, see if you can sell it, and then you get early access to the show and everything. It's pretty awesome. We've got time for like 1 or 2 more questions. Yeah.
Finish the story, like they have an idea, but they can't like get it on paper.
Okay, what advice would I have for someone who's trying to finish a storyline and they're really struggling to get it on paper? This was a constant thing that I was struggling with throughout this process. And what Deb was constantly was doing, one is if you have an accountability buddy, that really helps. Like if you have someone who can kind of nudge you and be like what like you have to report to each week, even if it's just like, hey, so you set a goal each week of where you're gonna be, and then you tell the other person, hey, I'm gonna be here at this goal, and then you have to report to them, I got this done or I got that done, and where you're at. That helps in itself. It also, and like even if you're doing it with yourself and you say, I need to have this done, and even if like you just even if you're going panel by panel saying, I need this done and this done and this done. And one thing you can do that I couldn't do when I started this process, you write out you think of the beats of your story, and you go, I'm writing a restorative justice graphic novel where the main character killed another person in a crash, and he's going to tell a story about addiction and drinking, and then he's going to he's going to talk about that, and then talk about how he had to go to a sentencing hearing, and how he's helping out the family and what happened there, and how he's going to come back from that. And you go through all those points, and then you just stick it in ChatGPT, and then it'll write a script for you, and then you can go through and just go, nope, this, yep, and then go through, clean it up, and now you're just editing, and you can clean it up in the way that you like it, and you've gotten it's based on your story points, and then you can clean it up and do it that way, which is a useful tool too. But I think we're at time. Thanks, Carissa.
Well, I want to give a big thanks to Ryan. I'm going to clap. Yay. And I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. We will send out the recording and a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. Again, just thank you to everyone who made this night possible. I believe Liz Brown from the library actually has a table with some books and suggestions for comics and things. And for everyone who's online, I will connect with her and send you some suggestions as well. And otherwise, have a wonderful evening, and thank you again for being here.